Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2012 World Dairy Expo. Today's seminar, How Many Replacement Heifers Do You Need?, is sponsored by Nutrition Physiology. The speaker today is Dr. John Kern, Clinical Associate Professor, Virginia, Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Kern is a Clinical Associate Professor of Production Management, Food Animal Medicine in the Department of Large Animal Clinical Science at the Virginia, Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine at Virginia Tech. For over 15 years, he has worked training students and performing extensive extension research. Before his tenure as an associate professor, he was part of a large animal practice. This seminar has been approved for continuing education credits from the American Registry of Professional Animal Scientists and the American Association of Veterinary State Boards RACE program. Forms are available in the back if you are interested in RACE credits. At this time, I'd ask you to please silence your cell phones. And if you have a question during the seminar, please feel free to ask it at that time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I apologize for many of you who will not be able to understand me perhaps. I am from Virginia and I do talk a bit funny. The good news is I talk pretty slow and we don't use too many big words. But for my friends from up north, there's Dr. Irene Crowder in the back with Novartis. She can help translate for you if you have trouble understanding what I'm saying. I like everybody to know the quality of the person that they're listening to, and so I want y'all to understand that I was able to figure out what killed this particular animal. Can anybody figure out what might have killed that heifer that's laying there? Lightning strike. Yep, that's the call you hope for. Your first call when you first get out of veterinary school. Rarely is the first call you get that easy, but that's the one you kind of hope for. Nice, easy deal like that. How many of you think the veterinarians can't tell time? I got one person. Everybody else thinks y'all's veterinarians are a lot better than our veterinarians in Virginia because we tend to be late, right? I'll let you in on a little secret. You know, you're running late. What you do is you put your pedal down to the floor as you're driving up the farm lane, stir up a lot of dust, and jump out of the truck real quick. That's what I always did, you know, to try to help make up for that. But just to tell you why we're late sometimes, you know, this guy said, "Don't worry, Doc, she's up in the barn." And sure enough, we went to pull the calf, and she was up in the barn. I forgot to ask him if the barn had doors and/or gates or something that would hold her in the barn, but sure enough, she was up in the barn. We did get her caught and get the calf pulled out of her. It's a little bit of a challenge. I got a little smarter as I went along and said, guy called and said, "Doc, I got a calf I need pulled." And then have you got her where I can get my hands on her? I got a little smarter. He said, "Don't worry, I got her tied to a tree." And I thought, well, that's good. And sure enough, if you look right there, there's a rope around her neck leading over that sycamore tree over there on the bank right there. So he did have her up tied to a tree. He was, however, smart enough not to tell me that she was down in the creek. So, you know, just a few reasons why we're late sometimes when we're late. I was finished up a herd check one day there, and the guy said, "Doc, while you're here," you know, you guys don't do that, right? "Doc, while you're here, could you do something for me? You know, I've got a pig I'd like to get castrated." Well, I looked at my watch, and you know, I had a little time before had to be at the next call, and I said, "Sure." I don't know what you guys call pigs, but that's a hog where I come from, and his testicles were bigger than what I was counting on castrating, you know, and so you know, it took a little longer than what I thought. And then finally, you know how you know if you need to look for a new veterinarian? If that's what it looks like after your vet's been there. So anyway, so everybody's got to show a picture of their kids, and those are my kids, no doubt. My kids were at a meeting like this one day, and we were at the back of the room. They were doing that sort of thing. And it's interesting, one of my kids drew this picture, which is of me sticking where I spend most of my time with my arm stuck to the rear end of a cow, because that's what they think of your dad. You know, you get a real true sense when your kids are about 6 years old what do they think of you. And here's the other kid drew a picture of me standing up front giving talks. Now, if you look really, really closely, there's one person in the audience who has a really big smile on her face, is really happy, and I'm pretty sure this person has a tear coming down. Now, I don't know if my kids were copying somebody that was out in the audience while they were doing that, but you know, you get a true sense of how things are. this is a really simple question that really is hard to answer. And so what is the right number of replacement heifers? And I cannot fathom the amount of changes we've gone through in the last few years with the dairy industry. The value of our cull cows, we used to think $300 or $400, now $800 plus. Oftentimes we were selling cull cows for, so the value of that good cull cow we have is potentially much greater than it ever was, which significantly changes some of the issues that we're talking about here. The value of springing heifers. I mean, it's not that long ago, and I'm going to use reference to, within the Mid-Atlantic region, some of your numbers may be a little differently and that sort of thing, but we were selling springing heifers for as much as $2,500. Now we're struggling to get $1,600 or $1,700 for kind of pretty decent quality springing heifers at the time. I don't know what your numbers may vary from that, but that's kind of where we are. Certainly they've devalued from the peak that they were. Cost of grain, anybody not seen the cost of their grain go up? Certainly that's huge. I just picked kind of a random number there. I mean, obviously it's significantly different depending on what we're talking about product-wise, but I think it's fair to say that many of our ingredients have doubled or thereabout in price relative to what they were a few years back. And so that's changed the equation quite a bit. Sex semen has obviously played a role in the heifers on a farm, and then genomics, probably the newest player out there, and what's its role. So there are lots and lots of changes. This spring in Virginia, I paid $1.50 for a 300-pound Holstein steer. I had clients who were selling Holstein heifers for $1.50 a pound. I never thought I'd live to see the day where Holstein steers would bring the same thing per pound as Holstein heifers. But we certainly saw that in our area at least. We also saw beef springing heifers bring more than dairy springing heifers. Significantly more. $300 to $400 more for our best. Now, granted, I'm comparing our best commercial beef heifers, not purebred stuff, commercial beef heifers with kind of mid-grade dairy replacement heifers, springing heifers. But those are things that are just never really thought we would see or get used to in that time. Historically, certainly when I started 20 years ago, this was most everybody's deal. We'd raise every heifer born, breed every heifer that we had on the farm, and on many of the places that I worked with and continue to work with, breed and breed and breed and breed every heifer on the farm. We'd always have that heifer that was 36 months old, and when she was in the springing lot, she was a great old big thing and looked really, really nice, and then I was working on her a little bit later after she calved, and the guy goes, remember that heifer we were talking about, how nice she looked, how much milk she was going to make, and because we kept those heifers for such a long period of time, everything. Most every client that I worked with, bar just a couple 15 years ago, needed every heifer, and many of the clients that I worked with did not raise enough heifers to meet their demands, and so they took all of them. And historically we've used this rule of thumb that you need one replacement heifer on your farm for every cow that you have on the farm that's lactating. That's kind of been a general industry-wide rule of thumb for that, and that's assuming you have a 24-month calving interval for your heifers.
Just lactating or lactating?
Lactating, just lactating, not dry cows, just lactating. What is the most important question to answer first? I think it is, what's the future of my dairy? So if we're sitting down to figure out how many replacement heifers, and goodness knows the economics are such that, and we're going to go through some of the economics here in a little bit, are such that I think this is a legitimate question that you need to be asking. We try to sit down with our producers that we work with, clients, at least once a year, and sit down with them. What are your plans? What's your 5-year goals? What are you trying to do? Are you, what's the future? Expansion. Obviously, how many heifers you need if you're trying to expand is significantly different than if you're not trying to expand. And so that's going to play a key role in how many heifers and what you're going to want to do. That one's fairly obvious. Maintain current cow numbers. If you're at status quo, let's say you're milking 200 cows and you want to be milking 200 cows for the foreseeable future, then you certainly need a different number of heifers than somebody that's trying to expand. Let's say that perhaps you had reproductive issues, had other issues, your cow herd's not quite of the quality that you really like. You would like to make some improvements in your cow herd, and so maybe you're going to want to cull a little heavier. You'd like some options for culling those cows. Some of the best herds I work with are herds that really do get to make a lot of choices on culling cows. It can really make a huge difference. Old vet that I went to work for when I got out of school, Dr. Harry Price, taught me a phrase called the year too long cow. Y'all know about the year too long cow? You kept her 1 year too long because she got pregnant and you decided to go ahead and keep her even though her udder wasn't that pretty, her feet and legs weren't that bad. And then what do? I come along and beat you up when we review the record 6 months later and say, how come you're having so much trouble with your fresh cows? And it's because you had too many of those cows that you kept around trying to maintain your cow numbers. If you have enough extra pregnancies to make better decisions and choices about culling, which 10 or 15 years ago, most of the people that I work with never had any choices. If a cow became pregnant, we kept her, no matter what her udder looked like, her feet and legs looked like, her somatic cell count was. It's amazing the knockdown effects that can have on the rest of your herd and the lessening of problems. I have a client we went through the calf scour deals, went through that, colostrum management and all that stuff. He started feeding the calves, saw how little fun it was to work with scouring calves. All of a sudden the colostrum management problem went away. He decided that if he was going to feed the calves, he was going to feed 40 calves a day. He just wanted to put milk out for 40 calves, not have treat scours. And it's the same thing with this, having those cows that aren't issues and aren't likely to have problems. They're not lame, and so they lose body condition in the dry cow lot. They don't freshen in good and that sort of thing. Really can make a huge difference. So let's talk about half of the equation of how many replacements you really need, and that's the demand, or what we commonly refer to as culling. And first thing we got to talk about is this thing called good cull versus bad cull. And I've got to give Dr. David Byers credit for this. He's the first person I ever heard talk about this. The group in Minnesota has gotten a lot of credit for discussing this, but this is really the key to this. We can get as high as $1,000 for this cow right here. She weighs 1,800 pounds. She's 525 days in milk. We weren't able to get her bred back, and so now we've gotten our money out of her in lots and lots of milk production that she's made. This cow right now, because of the value of cull cows, is worth a lot of money. To flip her to a replacement animal is not going to cost us very much. And so just a tremendous girl who's done a lot of good work for us on the farm. And we contrast her to this cow right here, right? Everybody wants to talk about, well, cull cows are bringing $800,000, $900, whatever you want to talk about. However, people don't want to realize that a lot of the cull cows they may be generating on their farm may be more like these cows that are right here. Those cows, if that cow does manage to get up, is never going to generate this gentleman $800 or $1,000. Most likely is going to generate him negative $75 because he's either going to have to pay or get a farm employee to bury that animal or dispose of it in some way, shape, or form. So, cow culling drives our demand for replacements within our dairy farm. How many culls? That's what we tend to usually use, is how many culls, percent culling rate, and that sort of thing. I'm going to really push you hard that we need to look at when are cows culled. And so what I really want you guys to focus on, I pay only marginal attention to the percent cows culled. Obviously, if it's far out of whack, too high, or it can be too low, then we wind up with a bunch of those cows that are year too long cows. Then I'm going to look at that. But I'm going to suggest and push you guys that when you look at your records to really look at when cows are culled. And that's going to make a huge difference. And if you look at this chart right here, now this is just a schematic that I did up. These are not two real herds. But if you look right here, part of the reason that some herds have trouble maintaining their cow numbers is if farm A, they both have the same culling rate. They both cull about a third of their cows. Okay? But this farm has an average days in milk and culling of 100, as opposed to this farm whose average days in milk for culls is 200. And look at what that does. That's 11 cows worth of lactations that Farm B has over Farm A. That's 11 cows, just solely based on when cows are culled. And when you think about what your replacement needs are, that is going to be a huge driver on your farm as to what your replacement needs are. That's why it's so important that you know what you are when your cows are being culled, days in milk wise, when you're doing that. Now let's go through some examples. Here's an example of some DHIA records out of Raleigh. Everybody has access to something similar to that, no matter what your system are. Here's a farm. This farm's in expansion mode. This farm's wanting to expand their cow numbers quite significantly, but look right here. So that farm has a 47% cull rate. I think we could all agree that a farm that's trying to expand, that's most likely too high for what they're wanting to do. If you look at that, a huge number of those animals died, 40 out of 282. So we have some issues there. However, that only tells part of the story. This story is much worse because when you look at the total number of calvings, sorry, hit the wrong button there. We had 683 calvings, 72 out of those 683 calvings left in the first 30 days. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's a huge issue, 10.5%. 1 out of 10. This guy was buying heifers, buying herds of cows, trying to expand his herd, and 1 out of 10 of those, everything that calved, left. I mean, not only is his cull rate high, but when they're leaving means that his number of days per cow calved that they're in lactation is incredibly low. And so that's a real issue that we have, and you can see that we still lose a bunch, and that's about as, we're losing another third of those cows when we get up to another 5%, half again as many, when we get up to 60 days. So we're still having a bunch of cows that are broken, limping along to 30 days in milk, because usually there's not that much difference between 30 and 60-day cull rates. I encourage you to look at this. I look at this significantly. On large herds, we look at 30 days. I look at 30 days. On small to medium-sized farms, I look at 60 days. And on some small farms, we look at 100 days. And the only difference, because if you're milking 100 cows or less and you have issues there, then one heifer that calves and gets paralyzed or something can make a huge impact on your numbers and stuff. And so I kind of break it down into that. It's not as nice, it takes longer to get those numbers, but certainly depending on your herd size, it depends on what those numbers are we want to look at. But those are some real issues on this farm. In this case, it turned out to be that a mistake in communication with the feeding crew. The feeding crew was they were supposed to be feeding these animals a total of 15 pounds of dry matter of corn silage and grain. They had it, and the rest of that came in hay in their diet that was fed free choice. They had it beat in their heads that they needed to feed needed to be in front of cows all the time. Well, needless to say, if you feed dry cows 15 pounds of dry matter, it's gone pretty quick. These cows were getting fed 32 pounds of corn silage and grain on a dry matter basis. And so we had terrible problems with ketosis, all in a little minor communication error. That was all that was going on there. All right, another herd. This is, I can tell you who this herd is because this is our herd at Virginia Tech. And so we milk a couple hundred cows at Virginia Tech at our dairy location there. I'm not very proud of that number either, though. You can see that for our older cows, we lose 7% of those cows in the 12 months that this data was for. In the first 30 days, we lost 9% in the first 60 days. These are now numbers that are very easy to get out through DHIA Raleigh and through many of the systems. Dairy Wellness Plan probably started that, getting that information out. 10 years ago, I had to go in with a spreadsheet and download this data into a spreadsheet and convert it into my own little deal. Now, most all of your record-keeping systems will present this information for you in a fairly easy-to-get deal. We're not quite as bad on first lactation animals as most of the time is the case, unless we have some sort of issue with what heifers got bred to or heifer development, and so we're within where I'd like to be there. But we still have some issues to work out within this herd as far as that goes. Another way you'll see this presented, and I don't like this method, and I apologize for the numbers and stuff being so small, but is a percent of culls. I much prefer looking at a percent of calvings and when they leave, and not when they leave as a percent of culls. I only bring this up because if you see numbers that are presented as normal, then pretty typically people will use different numbers depending on whether it's a percent of total culls or a percent of calvings. I think your percent of calvings, we can do that number much more in a much more robust time frame, so we can narrow that time frame down. As soon as those cohort is calved for 30 days, we can immediately look and see how they are doing, as opposed to taking a year-long look at our deal and see where we're at from that standpoint. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. And so I don't like this. Just be aware that you can see this, and you may see numbers out there that are called normal that look quite a bit different, in which case you got to look and make sure it's a percent of culls or a percent of calvings. That's our farm, and you can see that's a farm that's having issues, Virginia Tech farm, and you can see pretty readily that's just a graphic representation that are problems in older cows, in third and greater lactation cows. Easy way to look at that survival curve. The lower that line gets, the more cows that have been culled. Here's another farm. This is an expansion farm as well, and so this farm's expanding. They're wanting to increase cow size, needing to do that quite readily, but when you go in there and look and delve into these guys' records, you can see that not only are they not going to be able to expand at the rate they're going, they're not going to be able to maintain their cow numbers. Very significant issues with dry cow management and that sort of thing. And so this farm would need many more heifers, and when we go into planning and looking at 6 months down the road, how many heifers they're going to need in the next 6 to 12 months, we can say you're going to need quite a few, and if we don't get these problems corrected, we're going to need even more than what we would otherwise. And expansion and increasing cow numbers is really out. And that's that farm graphically represented in the survival curve. You can see those third and greater lactation cows, they just have a real issue and a real problem trying to stay in the herd. Another farm, not quite as bad. This farm actually can maintain their cow numbers. They do an excellent job with repro and heifer development is the primary reason they're able to get by that. Certainly we have an issue with losing basically 10% in the first 30 days of the calvings. That's still 1 out of 10, which is still too much in my book. And we're going to need, this farm needs the excellent repro. In this case, the cows that do get through this farm, they get through very well. We have two different classes of cows. We have cows that break, and the rest of the herd who does very well, and they get bred back and transition through very well. And so figuring out what that is and why that's going on was the challenge in this herd. What triggered these cows to break while the rest of the herd was going and doing so well. But the fact that they got the rest of those cows doing well, milking well, breeding back well, and did a good job with heifer development allowed them to maintain cow numbers in spite of these being higher than we would like to see. Anybody have any questions on cow culling or any comments or anything that they would like to make? Yes, sir.
What is your goal for 30 days?
My goal is 5%, realizing that most people are going to have a hard time getting below 7. I would love to see, and we have a few people that can make 5%, and so my gold standard is 5. I don't get real worried until you get above 7. That's what I use for my numbers. Anybody else have any comments about what number they would use for below 30 days as a percent of calvings? That's what I like. That's what I like to see. I can say that the very best farms that we work with they can only get cows down to 5. Heifers they can get down to 2 and below, a little bit below, but cows it's very hard to get below 5. separating out 2+ lactations and first lactation separates. But combined, I would like to see it below 5 for sure. Yes, sir. Yep. Cumulative, yes, sir. Good question. That's exactly right. That is cumulative. So in that next 30 days, they only lost 2% more. That's a cumulative number. And the reason that's presented like that is because the records, like I said, on mid-sized farms, it gets hard to look at less than 60 days because you just don't have that much calvings. That's a cumulative number. Good point. What's that? Yes. 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 And the individual numbers in there are all cohorts for the individuals. I just couldn't blow all that up. Just pulled out some of the things to see. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is, I can see as a pattern trouble with older cows.
Yep.
And that's why probably we're not over 2.6
Yep.
cows. What can we do about it?
All right, so the question was, you see the problem with older cows, and what could we do about that problem with older cows? We did a survey, and many of these herds were included in that survey. 25% of the calvings, those cows were subclinically ketotic. And every one of those herds was included in that survey that I just presented out there. It may or may not have been exactly the time. We did a year-long survey of 25 herds, all the calvings. I used to think it was more subclinical hypocalcemia. I have since believed that at least in our area, we have a huge problem with transition cow management and subclinical ketosis. And so strong emphasis on that. The farm that had the 9 and 11, we made a huge effort. They were running about 50% subclinical ketosis in their adult cows calving. And everywhere we looked, subclinical ketosis, much worse in cows and heifers, no surprise there. I have come to believe, right or wrong, that that's the biggest issue facing our transition cows, at least in the area that I am in. And so I think that's what we've got to work on. Yep. Yes? That's an excellent question. The question was, how are we drawing blood? When we did this survey of these 25 herds, we drew blood. Because we were doing so many herds, it was 3 to 17 days. We used the precision extra meter, which I really like, except when it's cold outside. We had to learn some, I don't know, many of y'all are from much colder environments than I am, and we learned some inventive ways to keep the thing warm. It works really well till it gets cold, and then we got to put, I've still my students' hand warmers and stick it beside the machine. They didn't like that very much, but the machine was much happier. So we did precision extras between days 3 and 17. Were I doing it on a farm at home, I would do 3 to 7 or 3 to 10, either once or twice a week. I would do it if I were doing a intense fresh cow monitoring system. Most of our cows that were going to be high, they were spread out amongst that whole period, but I believe we would catch the majority of them. And you look at other people's data in after 3 days and by 7 or 10 days. And so I would pick somewhere in that neighborhood to test those cows. Good questions. Anybody else have any questions or anything that didn't seem clear? Yes, ma'am. Question is, why do I think we're having ketosis issues? Certainly, now my personal opinion, we tried within this study to differentiate. We put herds in we stratified herds by good management for transition cows. By our definition, we had a criteria, fair and below what we thought was bad. Interestingly enough, we were unable, partially because practically we only had 2 herds that fell below the 15% threshold. Almost all our herds were above that threshold that's supposed to be a problem if you look at the data. When I've done real train wrecks, it's been too much corn silage, for sure. I personally believe that. I'm not a nutritionist. I occasionally play one on TV. I stayed at the Sheraton and not the Holiday Inn Express last night, but I do believe we can get too much starch and corn silage in there, and so I think that's an issue. We have some major facilities issues as well. A lot of the facilities I work with are older facilities. A lot of our dry cow management and nutrition, a lot of heat stress on dry cows, no heat abatement done on dry cows. If you look at that work lately, that's been very positive for helping dry cows. And so I think there's a whole range of issues, but certainly I think one of the big problems can be feeding too much corn silage. We've seen some real train wrecks we've gotten referred into. I get in trouble. I get in trouble when I say that. My nutrition, and I'm sure there are nutritionists in the room. Personally, it of course varies on the corn silage, what its starch level is and all that stuff. I like to see them not getting more than 8 to 10 pounds of corn silage from a starch. 8 to 10 pounds of corn silage on a dry matter basis personally. Now, there are all kinds of ways to balance dry cow rations, and that's my personal opinion. And like I said, I have a lot of friends who are nutritionists, and they get antsy when I say that because they say you got to look at the whole ration. That's my rule of thumb, I guess is fair to say. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Do you think this ketosis is setting up through the whole dry period, or coming into play in a transition ration, or post, right? Post fresh. That if we go from a pre-fresh diet to a post fresh diet that's the lactating hot diet.
Yep.
Is that?
I hate to say yes, but yes. I think it's some of all that. I think how you manage that cow the last 2 to 3 weeks and how you transition her in the first 2 to 3 weeks can make a difference. I do believe you can go from the salad bar. For my students, I use the salad bar at Pizza Hut. You give them the salad bar, and then you then you tell her the day after she calves you can have all the pizza you want. And I think that can be rough on cows sometimes. Certainly the high straw, low energy diets can be made to work very well, and I'm a fan of those. When done properly, they also are one of the worst things when done improperly. From that standpoint, I think most of our issue is in dry matter intake and close-up dry cows. A little bit personally from my experience and what we see, overcrowding in fresh cows as well. Certainly the group at Wisconsin has well documented the differences there. But those are kind of where I start looking as far as that goes. Anybody else? All right. We move on to replacements then. So obviously that's going to be the other half of the equation and that sort of thing. And so that's what we're going to talk about now is the thought processes. And really what I want to try to get through are the thought processes that at least I believe you guys ought to go to, and when I'm working with clients, producers, that I want them to go through. Okay, what's the most important thing for you to know about your replacements? What do you think what I think is the most important thing you ought to know? Okay, that's a good question. Absolutely. Yep, I think those are all good questions. You're exactly right. Here's the question that I think we need that many people don't have. How much does it cost to raise a heifer? It is hard to get into making decisions on what to do with these heifers and when to do what if you don't really know this answer. And I'm not saying you have to completely enterprise your heifer budget if you're on a small to mid-sized farm. Obviously, on a large farm, it's much easier to do that. You don't have to figure out, 10% of my tractor goes to utilizing, working with the heifers or whatever. If you get feed cost, your facilities cost, and the labor costs that are specifically associated with heifers and get those out, don't worry if you use a scrape tractor, 1 hour a week to clean out the lane that the heifers eat at or what sort of thing. At least we'll have a better issue and a better thing than we would have otherwise. So that's what we want to look at there. I just did some budgets up for feeding heifers. These numbers may or may not apply to you. I tried to use some fairly generic numbers for what it would cost to feed heifers right now, just to give you guys an idea. Obviously, it's going to be somewhat different on every farm, and I used kind of your production cost for corn silage, but I used fair market value for corn and soybean meal and commodity products. So if you had your own corn, obviously you could do it, and soybeans, you could do it cheaper than this. Your corn silage, I did value at that. But just to give you guys an idea, I think we're going to have about $100 in a bottle calf, depending on when you wean it. and what system you're using to feeding it. You may get them through a little bit quicker and a little bit cheaper than that, but it's going to be somewhere in that neighborhood. Then we go the first 6 months of life, the rest of those first 6 months of life, we're going to have another $150 or $60 in those heifers. Until we get all the way out here to that heifer's ready to go into the dry cow lot, we've got, by my estimate in today's feed cost, average across the country, about $1,150 in feed. I'm not talking about labor, I'm not talking about facilities, I'm talking about feed. And so that's a lot, folks. And I think that's the reason why I was asked here to give this talk predominantly, and why I get asked this question now. This question was never a question I was asked before. But now I think it is an important question. I think that what it's costing us to raise heifers today has made this a very valid question and a very important question to answer on your farm. Because typically, this will be about the number 3 expense on your farm after feed and labor, feed for the lactating cows. So replacement expenses are huge and can make a huge difference. The other thing I want you guys to think about when we're thinking about how many heifers you have, particularly if you potentially have excessive heifers. If you don't have enough heifers, then it's not important. But if you're out there now, I work with a lot of people now who have more heifers than they need. And there are some important hidden costs there to having more heifers than you need, over and above what it costs you to raise them versus what you can sell them for, the obvious economic one. Facilities. I can't tell you the number of times that we've gone in, got all excited with sex semen, produced a bunch of heifers, and in spite of us trying to talk to the owners and stuff about that, we swell our facilities up and have all kinds of problems. You know, same thing for feed. You know, here's an example. This is a heifer, came in. Now, this heifer is down from worms, folks. I mean, I never see this bad a problem with worms anymore. With the dewormers we have available, this farmer lost 3 heifers, and by the time we saw them, we saw this third one, and it did not survive either. It was too thin to get up and everything. This guy had started using sex semen, had facilities issues, and had to mix 2 groups of heifers together. And so now we've got heifers that are 450 pounds in size difference, plus we have 30% more heifers than we've ever had. And this is the kind of issues we have. And so I see this quite often, that when we start getting these excessive numbers of heifers, because we're doing a much better job with repro, maybe we're using sex semen, maybe we're not, maybe even using some 75 in the cows in some instances and that sort of thing. We can generate a lot of heifers if we're doing things very well. What does that do? And we can do all that work and effort, and then when we get a salmonella outbreak in the calf growing in the hutch area or the calf barn, you know, we can run into issues like that. So you've really got to look at, can my facilities handle this sort of issue? Feed. This is just a little snapshot of how much feed typically goes into heifers. This is a 450 cow dairy. This dairy would need about 7,000 tons of corn silage today. We just did a corn silage budget for this farm because we were doing some partial budgeting for making earlage, and they wanted to feed as much corn silage as possible to every group of animals on the farm as possible, and their requirements were 7,000 tons, basically. If they had had another 40 to 50% more heifers, that would have been 7,750. That's what the green number represents. How much more corn silage it would have taken to raise those excessive heifers, those extra heifers that we have trying to make decisions with. So in times, for those of you that have not been blessed with good forage and have problems, now's probably not a time to have those heifers utilizing that forage. So now we've got to go back and buy expensive replacements for that forage to feed to the lactating herd. We probably need to think about, is this exactly the number of heifers I need, and can I get by with less heifers, and then therefore I move them. That comes back to what our demands are from culling, and when we cull cows, we can look at those things. If we're over that 1 heifer per cow and our culling practices are in line and good, maybe we're short on forage, the best economic decision may be to move some of those heifers quicker than later. You know, that equates, if you'd shelled that corn out, that's about $57,000 worth of shelled corn at $300 a ton. for corn if you were having to purchase that. And so that's something that cash flow wise we might make utilize. Now we don't have that for corn silage, but that's something that we might not need for 14, 15 months on this farm, and cash flow wise that can help us get us through some tough times on this farm by not having those extra heifers. And then finally, labor, particularly on small to mid-sized farms. I run into this issue quite frequently. The labor issue that, people wear lots of hats, and just having this many more heifers to feed milk to, this many more heifers to get moved around and get managed around and managed, even if they're doing a good job and have plenty of feed, they're wearing out themselves and or the people that do the work for them, and then something's got to give down the road as they get tired and don't do as good a job and that sort of thing. And so you've got to ask yourself, am I generating, and I can't believe I'm asking this question, are we generating so many heifers that we are putting strains on one of these things? And that's an important hidden cost you guys need to consider. Just as another thing, folks, one of the biggest losses of our replacements is right here. Okay, another expansion dairy wanting to expand. Just over 10% of their calves or heifers are born dead. And I can't explain this. It should be males, right? 80% of the farms that I look at, it's females. I can't explain that. I cannot explain that. Everything I know says it screams it should be the male calves. They should be bigger and have more problems and all that stuff. For whatever reason, it's not every farm, but the majority of farms that I look at, there's usually not this significant a difference, but we lose more heifer calves than we lose male calves. And that makes no sense whatsoever. The book says it should be the other way, and so does everything I can think about. I really don't understand that. But it's an important thing to look at when you're looking at heifers, and that's not really what we're talking about today, but I just think that's another one of those little things on your records that you guys need to look at fairly regularly. Am I or my help intervening quick enough on this deal? Are we helping those distocias as we should? Do we have other issues and that sort of thing? And obviously, there are some things that need to be worked on this farm. Okay. This farm is a farm that's looking to expand. Is this farm going to be able to expand cow numbers in the next year? If you look right here, this is how many cows are milking. This is how many cows, this is how many replacement heifers they have. No. Even with excellent culling practice, this farm is not going to be able to expand their animal numbers. And so that's a real issue. This farm's stated goal, when we talked about goals, is to go to 800 cows. Built a new barn, we want to fill it up. We would like to fill it up with internal herd growth. And I've got to say, I have to sit down with this farm and their banker and say, not only are you not going to fill that barn up, a year from now you're going to be milking less cows than what you currently are milking. And so you can see it's a major concern because we have a huge difference in numbers between those heifers that are less than a year old and those heifers that are over a year old. And that related to some severe calf problems that farm had in the previous 12 months prior to that, when this group of animals would have been young calves. All right, now, quiz. Which farm has a better replacement profile, Farm A or Farm B? Both of them have significantly more replacements than they have lactating animals. So which farm is better? B. So who said B over there? Did that you? Somebody over there said B. You said A. I got one vote for A. You said B in the back. Okay, why do you say B? Okay. Oh, that man, he gets a gold star. What does that tell you? What do you know about Farm A? You're pretty sharp, I can tell. What do you know about Farm A? What are they doing?
Either they had a big mortality or they cut back on their breeding program.
Yeah, and you don't know for sure which one of those are. I do. Average age of first calving, 34 months. 34 months, folks. So folks, it is not as simple as looking at this number that I told you about at the beginning of the talk. That's a huge problem and a huge issue, and so it's not that easy. So we've got to look at age at first calving to do that. This farm is 25 months. Sure enough, this farm is smoking. This farm is making replacements. This farm is also about to kill themselves with replacements. The stress is on their feed system, stress is on their facilities, and the stress is on their labor on this small to mid-sized farm, depending on what you want to call a 200 milking cow farm, are putting major stressors on this farming operation. We have sat down and asked the question, do we need to produce less heifers? Made extensive use of sex semen, used 75 in the cow herd, and we've got to ask ourselves, we either need to get rid of some heifers or we need to produce less heifers in some way, shape, or form on this farm because it's putting a major stress on this farm. Looks like a great problem, and it is, because now we can make decisions. And just exactly what you pointed out, that right there would tell you, and you couldn't differentiate which one of those it was, but it would tell you that it was one of those. And that's where we're going to kind of wrap up the talk here. And this is going to be very individual to you guys. I cannot tell you what this is. When is it best to market your excessive heifers? Part of it depends on when and what the marketplace is in your area. I spent some time with a Canadian vet yesterday, and so I was asking him his thoughts on this topic since I had him captive in the car with me and wanted to find out. He says that he believes that because they have a bunch of embryo transfer going on in the area he's in, that there is a little bump in value of those animals right about 12 to 14 months of age pre-breeding. So in their area, he thinks that's where the best place to market those animals for a premium is. So, it depends. If I can sell a calf at a week old at $300, how much have I got invested in her? About nothing. That's exactly right. It's going to be hard to find anywhere else in this system where I can net $300. I don't think I'm going to net $300 on a $1,700 spring and heifer. And guess what? I got no risk. We don't lose too many by a week of age. Now, not everybody can market heifers at a week of age. That may not be an option where you are. If there's a big dairy area that you're from, that's oftentimes easier to do than if you're in an area where there's not a big concentration of dairies. But that's really, it's a beef cattle mentality. When can I make the most money? It's really a stocker beef cattle mentality. When do I want to market this animal to make the most money? And that's the important question we got to ask ourselves after we've decided that we've got excessive pregnancies. When can I make the most money? Now, the easiest time to make a decision is right here. And why is that? Because now I know I didn't have salmonella go through my cow herd and wipe out 10% of the cow herd, and now I really need these, or I didn't have this other problem, or whatever else. So that's the easy time to make the decision. We've already gone through. And after all, who predicted 2 years ago that corn was going to be what corn is today? That's the problem. We're imperfect in the way we can predict things. That's what makes it harder. But I would suggest that many of you need to look back, way further back than what you're probably thinking, because that's almost pure profit. Now, I wouldn't push it to the nth degree and get right down to the exact number that I needed back here. But if I was generating, the farm I just showed you that's generating a pile of excessive pregnancies, I would hugely consider pushing back part of those and marketing those animals. And I think they should still generate those pregnancies and generate the pregnancies that there are. But instead of making a decision, we're just going to quit using, and I don't, everybody has their own opinion about sex semen, and I just present people the facts and they make their own decision. Some people think that's why we're where we are in the dairy industry now, and that's fine. But instead of making that decision, we need to make the best decision for that individual farm, and there's that. Now, what's the advantage of making a decision right here? Letting that animal calve, where does that really help us? And then making a decision 40, 60, 100 days in milk. What's the real advantage there? What's that? Okay, you know what her production is, and you know something about her, and know which ones you want to keep and which ones maybe you want to market. Yep. Oh man, I already gave him my gold star. You deserve a gold star, man, but I've already given it away. I'm sorry. And plus, my students will be mad because I only give out one gold star a month. But you deserve one. Yes, if you want to perpetuate this, that is the best way to perpetuate this whole deal of having excessive pregnancies is getting that calf out of that deal and then market them. What had you better be really good at if you're going to do that? You better be really good at reproduction, and you better be really good at transition cow management, because if you lose 10% of those heifers in the first 30 days, then that's a bad business model. And so that's why you look at some of those things I looked at before, because if you're really good at calving heifers in, you get live calves. We don't have that 10% stillbirth rate. It's down under 5, which is about the best we can do in the Holstein, at least with Holsteins. You do a good job with heifers and don't cull too many of them so you have them to sell. Man, it can be a tremendous tool to market those animals depending on the area you're in, but oftentimes that's a good thing to do. And now we've got that replacement animal, and we can do it all over again. And so that's something to think about. But that does nothing for the stresses on our facilities, our feeds, and our labor issues if those are issues on your farm. So you got to think about that. And then finally, can you milk too many heifers? And I think that's where some of us are today. I think the thing that it only costs $300 to $400 to flip a cow to a heifer. We have a good cow. We got heifers coming on. They're like, oh man, those are really nice heifers, and I've got $2,000 in them, and I can only sell them for $1,700. I'll just cull a cow. We'll cull a cow and we'll calve her in and milk her. I think some of us are milking too many heifers. And I think it's something important that you need to look at, because after all, heifers don't milk as well as older cows. And so it's something you've got to think about as far as what we're going to do and whether or not we're going to do that. That's why, we got caught now, and we couldn't have predicted these feed prices. And everybody likes to predict what just happened is going to happen, but I think we can fairly predict that we're not going to have any extra corn between now and the corn crop that comes next year, and unless it's super big, we're not going to have any carryover. And I think we can foresee the grain prices are going to be relatively high for the foreseeable future. And so expenses for raising heifers are going to be relatively high, and so we can look at that and use that as a tool to say maybe we can market some of these animals earlier for some of our operations and help them out. So the take-home points, look at your culling records. See if you have good culls or bad culls. I don't care why you culled the cow. At 500 days in milk, you may have put down that she was open and it was repro, but we don't remember that she had twins and retained her placenta and had all those problems to start with, and she got off to a bad start and that sort of thing. I care when they left, not why they left. Okay, that's really the huge key, because everybody codes them in differently and has different rules for why the cows leave. So that's how I'm going to define good culls and bad culls. Look at your records. Do you have enough heifers to meet your needs? Look at your culling. Look at how many heifers you have. Think about your history. Have you historically been able to meet your needs or not? Have you historically produced extra and that sort of thing? Look at how much it costs you to raise a heifer. And look at what your marketing plan is for these excessive heifers and try to maximize your profitability. Okay, that's all I had. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Given the price of beef, and if you've got a dairyman that's proven he can grow more recipients or replacements that he needs, do you have any of those kinds breeding the lower end of the herd of beef animals to possibly get a little more valuable baby calf?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. The question is, if I'm producing excessive numbers of heifers, and I know that historically I can do that, and my repro's good and all this other stuff's good, can I maybe take the bottom end of my cow herd and breed those to beef animals? And yes, there are a few people out there doing that. I think it's a legitimate thing to do. you need a good plan for what to do with those calves. I would suggest to you that if you're going to have those calves, go with your heifers and be raised with your heifers. The steer calves, you'll have more in them than what they're worth even at today's beef prices. The way we raise heifers and feed heifers makes it to where that doesn't work very well. You're really going to have a hard time selling those, even at today's prices, selling those beef steers. Now, they make some nice replacement heifers if you pick the right bulls and get enough muscling in them and that sort of thing from that standpoint. So I think that's a viable option. You just really need to think through your plan as those things go through. I get trouble with some of my clients that raise their bull calves because I buy bull calves and raise Holstein steers. Like, you recommend we sell ours, but yeah, that's only so you can go buy them, which isn't true. I buy worse ones than they produce, but well, my vet works real cheap, so you've just got to think about that, because feeding for £1 3/4 a gain is the bad place to be right now with the cost of feed for beef cattle. So I think it's a legitimate deal. Just think about your marketing strategy. Good question. Anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am. Okay, that's an excellent question. And the question was, why do I think about genomic testing for making decisions? I think it's very good potential. If you notice, I had it on the beginning of my deal and then didn't talk about it anymore. I am a veterinarian, and I played a nutritionist and an economist today, and I'm not quite smart enough to play a geneticist. I think it's an excellent tool for you to market some of your heifers for that. Having said that, I have no guidelines for what those are. You'll have to get with somebody who knows a lot more than me about genetics. But good question. Anybody else? Well, thank y'all very much. I appreciate your time and everything, and hopefully it was valuable, and thanks for coming.
All right, thank you.